What's up, everybody? Welcome to Moxie Bets, presented by Caesar Sportsbook. I'm Katie Mox, and today we're going to recap those Game 7s on Sunday. Both really crazy kind of upset games there. We're also going to preview the conference championship round. Here with our guy from the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, Munaf Manji. He is the co-host of the NBA pod, also the MLB pod as well. He also gets into some football. How are we doing, Munaf?
Doing well. Can't believe we're on to the conference finals here, but
I know.
Here we are. It's been an exciting NBA playoffs, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. But yeah, I'm excited. The conference finals, we'll see who goes to the NBA finals, and then I think this is the time where I start paying attention to the MLB as well. Now, when we're talking offline, that the NBA at least does one thing right, is have at least one game every single night going the rest of the way. But yeah, I'm excited. It's going to be a lot of fun in the conference finals.
I'm excited now because at least when it gets into this round as an East Coaster, you stop getting the 10:30 at night games. You know, they start being like a little bit more manageable to watch. I'm telling you, the first couple rounds are rough for us East Coasters. So let's, well, and I will say just in general, I feel like the NBA playoffs, maybe the first round was a little bit more lopsided. We saw some blowouts and people get out fast, but this last round has been excellent. I mean, we had two of them go to Game 7. It was really neck or neck, and you kind of didn't know who's going to win those games. I will venture to say that of the Sunday Game 7s, they were pretty shocking. There were some upsets.
Yeah, I feel bad for the Knicks. I really do. I mean, I had a futures ticket for them to win the title. It's just the injuries. It's just really unfortunate. And we'd be having a different conversation right now if that team was fully healthy. I mean, Jalen Brunson leaving with a fractured hand. Give a lot of credit to OG and Obi. Hamstrings and quad injury, especially, I mean, in any sport, they're always tricky and it takes a little bit to recover, but he came back. He got it out in Game 7. He couldn't finish the game. We already knew Julius Randle was going to be out. Mitchell Robinson as well. It just sucks for this New York Knicks team, but also the fact that the Pacers shot a historic number from the floor.
70%.
Unbelievable.
In the first half. I remember there was one point I'm like, oh, wow, they almost missed two shots in a row because it was just like, again. And they got out into a really, look, the Knicks did show some life there. They think they got it within 6, right? That was maybe the closest that they got it. And then Jalen Brunson hurt his hand. But at that point, this Knicks team, they were just no quit. They were all fight. They were shorthanded coming into the playoffs. As you said, Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson was dealing with some things. OG was dealing with some things. And then in Game 6, where I really thought that the Knicks could close that one out, all of a sudden you saw Josh Hart, touching his abdomen. And I don't know if he pulled a muscle or had some kind of strain there. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, no, not again. And then they get to the Game 7 and you think they could do it at the Garden. And then, the Pacers come out and they shoot 70% in the first half. Absolutely historic. Could not miss anything. I mean, Halliburton, 26 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds. Siakam, 20 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. I mean, just on fire. And then the Knicks kind of come back. You're like, all right, we're in this. And then Brunson fractures his hand. And it was just gut-wrenching. But at the same time, for Knicks fans who have had close to 24 years of absolute misery, this was probably the most hopeful that they have been. And even when you saw most of the fans stayed till the end and they still gave a standing ovation for their team, because at this point, when you're that injured, what are you going to do? But this team had no quit. And we heard Jalen Brunson also say in his press conference, like, I'm so proud of this team. I love everyone in this building. And I believe that they will be back. I also believe if they were actually healthy, they're probably the only team that could really give this Celtics team a run for their money in the East. But what were your, I guess, overall, I mean, you already gave me your overall thoughts for the Knicks, but how do you feel about this Pacers team? I mean, they are pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think the credit that you have to give the Pacers is that they played their brand of basketball from the regular season into the playoffs, right?
Fast.
Like they were fast, right? One of the fastest paced teams in the entire NBA during the regular season. And a lot of people say the game slows down in the playoffs and turns into those half-court possession games, but no, the Pacers stayed true to their brand of basketball. And obviously, yes, the injuries played a factor for them in both rounds 1 and round 2. But again, that's just the cards that they were dealt and they took advantage of it. But I mean, give a lot of credit to Rick Carlisle. I think since he last won the title in, I believe it was 2008 with the Mavericks, he hadn't gotten past the first round until this year, about 16
Yeah.
years later. Now they find themselves in the Eastern Conference Finals against this Boston Celtics team, who also has been fortunate as well. But I mean, it's been a complete team effort by the Indiana Pacers, right? Halliburton hasn't looked like the regular season Halliburton, but they've gotten contributions from the other guys on this team, whether it's been TJ McConnell coming
Yeah.
off of the bench, Pascal Siakam has been great. Aaron Nesmith, Miles Turner has been incredible as well. So as bad as we feel for the Knicks team and the Knicks, fans, at the same time, Pacers did their job and they're here in the Eastern Conference
Yes.
Finals, who I do believe could possibly give the Boston Celtics a run for their money as well. But yeah, I really like watching this Pacers team throughout the season and in the playoffs.
And it's been a long time since the Pacers have been good either. I mean, we could talk about the drought that the Knicks have had,
Yeah.
but this Pacers teams and Pacers fans have felt similar misery for quite a long time. We'll get into the Pacers, obviously, as they advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. But what do you think is next for this Knicks team? Do you think they hold on to a lot of players? Can you see them grabbing anything? What do you think are maybe some offseason moves that the Knicks should make?
Yeah, I think that they will probably have to get another scorer next to Jalen Brunson. I mean, he was just absolutely incredible kid. I mean, we saw throughout the playoffs
Put the
how,
entire team on his back.
yeah,
Although Burks, there were chants at the Garden last night for Alec Burks, which was hilarious. But he came through in clutch moments when nobody else was available.
yeah, and we'll see what they do with Julius Randle. Hopefully, he's back with the team. But I
What do
do
you
think they
think?
need.
To me, he's polarizing. I can't tell if he's good or bad for the team.
What
Not
was
bad
it?
for the team, but not right for the team.
2 years ago was it, or 3 years ago? I want to say when they did make it to the playoffs with a healthy Julius Randle. He was an absolute no show
That's what I'm
during the
saying.
playoffs,
That's
right?
what I'm saying. Hmm.
And it seems like he's a great regular season player, but I want to see it translate in the playoffs for a guy like Julius Randle. Well,
Hmm.
we've heard the rumors maybe Donovan Mitchell coming over to the New York Knicks.
Woo!
I think
Can you imagine that?
that would cement them into at least I think at minimum top three in the
Hmm.
Eastern Conference.
Hmm.
But I do think they need to add another scorer next to Jalen Brunson, just really take some of that pressure off. You saw the blue collar guys, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart.
Yes. Oh, I love DiVincenzo, the big Ragu.
Yeah. Um, uh, Isaiah Hartenstein was absolutely phenomenal, filling in
Mhm,
for
mhm.
Julius Randle there as well in the front court. So they have the pieces. This team is, I think, like one. I don't want to say superstar away, but I think an all-star player away. Just having another
Yeah,
scoring option that will put them over the top. And I hope this season and this playoff run that Tom Thibodeau learned not to play his players into the ground, playing them 48 minutes a game to 45 plus minutes a
yeah.
game during the regular season. You can't do that. Like, that's where the
No,
injuries really add up. And I think we
no.
saw that, right, Katie?
Yes, yes.
Now,
Good point.
so hopefully that's something that he does learn and they add another score next to Jalen Brunson. But I expect this team to be competitive, uh,
Yeah.
for the foreseeable future, especially with Jalen Brunson. Just love watching him play.
And, these markets like New York who are historic that haven't been good, basketball's just better when the Knicks are better, basketball's
Yeah,
better when when the Lakers are good, all of these big market teams. Not that I don't like the small market ones, okay? We're gonna talk
sure.
about the Timberwolves right now, who's been really, really fun to watch, but I do think it's a little bit more fun, when these kind of storied franchises are doing well. So let's move on to what I thought was the most shocking Game 7 upset. The Timberwolves defeated the Nuggets 98 to 90. You talk
Hmm.
about people who play a lot. I believe Jokic played all but 1 minute
Yeah,
of this game. I mean, what was it, like a 30-point deficit that they only, I think they were down by like 30 or 20 something at some point. They were
they
able
were
to
down by
come
20
back.
something. Yeah,
20 something. 20 something. It
yeah.
was absolutely amazing. It was the largest Game 7 comeback in 25 years, even with Jokic and Murray scoring 30 plus points. It still wasn't enough. When this game started and the Nuggets were blowing them out in the first half, I was like, oh yeah, there goes those Nuggets. It was fun to you. We'll see you later. And then everything changed. Were you
Is
surprised?
I I think I
Yes and
was
no,
and I
right?
wasn't
Yeah.
at the same time, right? Just because it's the Minnesota Timberwolves and it's their leader, Anthony Edwards, and how this Minnesota Timberwolves team, they just don't have any quit in them. And it was
Yeah.
really a tale of two halves. And but what you mentioned there was a key point. Katie, that Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic did their thing last night. They accounted for 69 of the 90 points that the Denver scored yesterday. Outside of that, nobody else stepped up here in game 7. The next closest player that was even sniffing double digits was Michael Porter Jr., who only had 7 points. Everybody else was pretty much non-existent, especially in that second half
Yeah.
of this Denver Nuggets team. You look at the
Where you
flip
at,
side,
Aaron Gordon?
and he was incredible. At least in the first 5 games of the series,
I
he
know.
didn't show up, especially at home. And I've always said this a
Mhm.
lot, that role players tend to play a lot better at home, and they just didn't get
Yes.
that. Did
Yes.
Denver in game 7 where it
Mhm.
mattered the most. So, and you look at the flip side where Minnesota, all 5 starters were in double figures. If I told you, Katie, that Anthony Edwards going to shoot 6 of, what was it, 24 in game 7, you would have probably thought Denver would have won this game comfortably after that type of shooting performance. But every single player in that starting 5 showed up for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. So give them a lot of credit. If you had any doubts now about this Minnesota Timberwolves team,
Right.
put that to rest. They're
Put
headed
and
to the
I've
Western Conference Finals.
completely put it to rest. And you talk about how none of the role players really stepped up. Well, that's a lot of credit has to go to Minnesota's defense. They only allowed 37 second half points.
To the
Only
defending champ.
37 in the entire second half. That
That's
is
incredible.
insane.
Yeah. And that's their brand of basketball, right? They were one of the
Inside one
best.
of the hardest arenas to play in, right? You look at this Nuggets home court advantage, specifically during the
Yeah.
regular season, not so much in this series. Home court advantage wasn't really a thing for anybody,
Yeah.
but I just couldn't believe. But I will say there was a lot of Minnesota fans in there. At one point, when you knew that Minnesota was going to win, it sounded like a home field in their home court.
Yeah. And also altitude is a big deal, right? In Denver, we talk about the Mile
Yes,
High City.
yes,
But there was chinks in the armor for this Denver Nuggets team. We saw it in round 1 against the Lakers, but the Lakers just weren't able to take advantage of it, where
yeah.
Minnesota was able to take advantage of it, and they punched their ticket to the Western Conference Finals. But the depth, I think, is going to be a concern for this Denver Nuggets team. That's something that they're going to have to address in the offseason, where they didn't have it this season compared to last year when they won the title. But yeah,
Hmm.
this Minnesota team is just so fun to watch. I think not only their games, but their press conferences with Anthony Edwards are absolutely hilarious. I think it's a lot of fun for
I
this
thought the
team.
one last night was hilarious, and they were like, "Oh, you haven't." What did they say? Something about like you haven't won like this. We're like, "What are you talking about? We've lost for the last like 12
20
years. We
years.
lost the last." Yeah, he was like, "We lost the last 2 playoffs." Like, what do you mean we don't know what it is to lose? So I thought that was hilarious. When you talk about this Nuggets team, and you did mention the depth, is the depth to blame here, or can you point your finger somewhere else as to why this team wasn't as good this year? Although I will say, defending champions don't really make it past the second round. There was a stat they said on the broadcast last night. It's just
Yeah.
it's hard to repeat.
It's very difficult. I think it was the last team to do it but your Warriors were probably, they want to say, the last team to repeat,
I
if I'm
mean,
not
I'm
mistaken, right?
sure. Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
but I think that, yeah,
obviously.
the depth coming off of the bench, I think, was the biggest issue. I've always said that this Denver Nuggets starting 5 has been one of the more complete starting 5s when you talk about star power, guard play, 3-and-D players.
Mhm.
But they really didn't have a guy coming off of the bench for them that could contribute scoring wise when Nikola Jokic, especially when he comes off the floor. If you deep dive into the numbers like a nerd like I am, and you see like their offensive efficiency with and without Nikola Jokic, it's a night
Yeah.
and day difference. So they're gonna have to address that in the offseason. I think they're gonna need somebody to come off the bench and just add some depth to this team. But I mean, this Denver team, if you still have Jamal Murray, you still have Nikola Jokic, the MVP. I think they'll be back next season. I wouldn't be too worried if you're a Denver Nuggets fan.
No, and the thing you talk about the difference when Jokic is off the floor, but you can't have him play the entire game. But I know this was a game 7, and we
Yeah.
had to do that, but he looked gassed by the end of the game. He's still making some shots, but yeah, you can't have him play he's too big and he's too physical to play the entire game. All right, before we move on to some picks for the conference conference championship games here. On Saturday night, the Mavericks defeated the Thunder in game 6. You tweeted out that official Tony Brothers needs to be investigated. And not just you. I feel like NBA fans in general were outraged. He failed to overturn that late foul on SGA, which allowed Dallas to, of course, go on and win the game at the foul line. Talk to me about your thoughts on this call and what should have been done and how you feel about Tony Brothers.
So I do think it was the correct call. If you take a look at the replay,
Right, and what he said after. Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
and that made perfect sense to me, right? When you go watch the replay, it does match up. If you're watching this game, every single time the Dallas Mavericks would go for an offensive rebound, there was such a quick whistle, and it was by Tony
Mhm.
Brothers
Mhm.
pointing it the
Mhm.
other way towards the OKC Thunder side. You got that technical foul early in the game on Luka Doncic. They called a couple of I think it was back to back plays on Luka where he tried to draw the charge. They called it a blocking
Yep.
foul on him,
Yep.
and I think the very next play he got an offensive foul call on on him in that very next play, which was very curious to see. But it just seemed like that. I mean, I'm kind of a conspiracy guy. You know me. That they
Oh,
wanted
well,
OKC to cover the
yeah.
game, but Dallas to win it. That's
Ooh.
exactly what happened. And
Mhm.
I don't know, man. Tony Brothers just makes some questionable calls that time. He just sometimes has a very, very quick whistle. I'll leave it at that.
Well, here's the thing. I know in the NFL you do your ref reports. I also know you look into this in the NBA as well. So if we
Mhm.
see Tony Brothers, moving forward, officiating other things, what are some things to look out for gambling wise with the Tony Brothers game?
I think you probably want to look at underdogs on the spread at least. I think
Okay.
in and I should have this in front of me because I again the two guys I always follow is Scott Foster and Tony
Scott
Brothers.
Foster is like the one person everyone's
Yeah,
like, again, not Scott Foster.
yeah, it's like he's a
But
king
Tony
of it,
Brothers is
right?
a newer one for me to be on my radar.
Yeah. Yeah, so keep an eye on him. And again, those are the two veteran guys that are, officials, and I don't know how many of playoff games they've officiated, but Tony Brothers is one of those guys that I think that gets under the skin of some of these players. And
Yeah.
there are
Okay.
like if you just watch some of the games, Katie, like let's keep like watch it throughout the conference finals that if he is officiating, that he has a very, very quick whistle against some of the favorites on the spread. I think we saw that against Dallas, where hey, Dallas did win the game, but they didn't cover the spread, which I think that worked out very well for the book sometimes. But he's one of those refs that you're kind of sometimes raising your eyebrows at. But
Mhm.
that's one
Mhm.
player or sorry, one referee you want to keep your eye on for sure.
And you wanna look at home underdogs with him
You
potentially?
want to look at road underdogs.
Road
I think
underdogs.
underdogs in general. And
Okay.
then if you ever go
Okay.
back to the end of the night and you kind of take a look at what the books may need when it comes to Tony
Mhm.
Brothers, it may match up for you a little
Ooh,
bit. Little bit, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh my god, I love a Munaf conspiracy with Tony Brothers cooking the books here. Alright, we don't know this for sure, people, alright? We're just saying look
Yeah,
into
we're just
it.
chatting
Okay,
here,
so we're just yeah, just 2 friends talking
Yeah,
about some potential conspiracies in the NBA. I mean, whatever.
yeah,
Alright, so obviously the Mavs are moving on.
yeah.
Let's talk about OKC for a second because I feel like no one expected this team to be here this fast, right? That
Right.
the pieces were in place. Everybody knew that they were heading in the right direction, but for them to go as far as they did this season was really, really impressive. What do you think is next for the Thunder? Do they continue developing their young core? Is it trade time? For maybe one of their veteran stars. What do you think?
You know how the cliche goes. This a team is a year away from being a year away, and I think that the
Yes,
OKC
I
Thunder kind
love
of like
saying that.
right, like they
Yes.
fit that mold.
Uh huh.
OKC has, if you look at their draft capital, it is absolutely insane on how much
Mm,
draft capital this team has, especially with first round picks. Uh, I don't know. It goes in, I don't want to say like the next decade for this OKC Thunder team. I think the one thing they will have to address in the offseason is getting a big man to anchor that defense and being a rim protector
yeah.
because their biggest and tallest player is Chet Holmgren. And I mean, he's a skinny body right now. And I think that's going to be, who he's going to
Young.
be. Yeah. So I think they need like something like an Andre Drummond type, a Valanciunas type of
Mm.
player in there,
Mhm. Mhm.
just to kind of clean up the boards, give them some rim protection. I do believe that they can still develop their young players. Obviously, no, SGA is their future. I still do like Jalen Williams for this team, but they also can go out and trade for another superstar if they want to because of all the draft capital that they do have
Right.
next to SGA. Because, like I mentioned, he's going to be a future MVP, and I think this team is set up very,
Yeah.
very well for the future. So I think the two key things is maybe go out and get another star next to SGA, and you definitely have to address the front court because you really don't have that traditional big man like some of these other teams do for this OKC Thunder team. But again, if you're a Thunder fan, you're set up very, very well for the future. And I love their head coach and Mark Dagnall. He's absolutely fantastic for this team, and he's going to be there for a very, very long time.
I love that. All right, we talk about the Mavs real quick before we obviously get into our picks. I don't think people expected that Luca and Kyrie would kind of flourish together, right? Kyrie
Yeah.
14-0 in the playoff closeout games. It's his first conference final since 2017 with LeBron in Cleveland.
Hmm.
Luca game 6, 29 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. I It's been so hard to bet Luca for me because I keep thinking he's going to fall off in some way. I'm taking him on assists. I've been taking him on rebounds. I'm worried about his scoring, but then he's still, 40 something points in one game, 29 in this game.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Luca and Kyrie heading into this next round?
I was in the same camp with you. I thought that Luca, he's going to get the shot volume up, but is the question going to be he's going to be efficient? And we've seen him pop
Yeah.
up in the injury report, right? He's dealing with a knee injury
Yeah.
/ ankle injury
Mhm.
as well. So how effective is he going to be? Kyrie was incredible in round one against the Clippers, not so much until the second half in that third quarter in game 6 where they did clinch it. So, I mean, that 14-0 record.
A hobbled Clippers, though, too. I mean, this was not
Yeah.
a team that was at 100%. So
Yeah.
take that in consideration.
But again, they've coexisted and they're here in the Western Conference Finals for a reason. So I think Luca is going to continue doing Luca things. I think Kyrie has to step up in this series against the Minnesota Timberwolves. I know we'll talk about that here in a minute about the X's and
Yeah.
things like that. But I think for the Dallas Mavericks was really their role players that did step up, especially in games 4, 5, and 6. PJ Washington shot very well early in the series. You saw Derrick Jones Jr. in game 6 be that spark for this team
Yeah.
off the bench. Derek Lively was absolutely fantastic in game 6 as well. And I've talked about this a lot, that the two pieces that they added at the trade deadline in Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington is now starting to play dividends for this Dallas Mavericks team. But yeah, I think that when you talk about two ball dominant players like Luca and Kyrie, that people don't think that it can work. But here they are in the Western Conference Finals. They found a way to make it work. But now they're gonna have to be at 100% going up against the Minnesota Timberwolves team. So it's gonna be really fun to watch this series between these two squads.
It is, and we are going to get into those conference finals picks right after the break. You're watching Moxie Bets. Don't go anywhere. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the type of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. Welcome back on Moxie Bets, presented by Caesars Sportsbook, here with our guy Munaf Manji of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. All right, I saw that on SGPN you've already done, I believe, your Eastern Conference finals picks, or maybe you did both of them. I don't know. I was just looking on Twitter earlier today, so I'm going to pick your brain here a little bit when we look at these matchups. First up, the Pacers and the Celtics in the East. Game 1, Boston is favored by 9.5. They're minus 480 on the money line, according to our friends at Caesar Sportsbook. Pretty high total here at 220. When we look at the series, Celtics are obviously favored to win this one. What are your thoughts on this series? Can the Pacers do it?
So you take a look at this Pacers team. Let's go back to round 1 and round 2, right? They played Milwaukee in round 1. No Giannis. We talked about a lot of the injuries throughout the NBA and the playoffs, right? They didn't have Giannis, didn't have Dame for a couple games. And then we just talked about New York, how they also dealt with injuries as well. So again, you play who's in front of you. Injuries are part of the game. We know that. Now you go up against the Boston Celtics team, who's going to be by far the best offensive team that they are going to face. And they've been a well-oiled machine. Now the issue with Boston is that, do you trust them for a full 7-game series? Because we've seen them drop at least one home game in every single playoff series under Joe
Yeah.
Mazzulla.
Usually
I
game
do like
2.
usually game 2. And we saw that in the first 2 rounds, right? Round 1 against
Mhm.
Miami, and then
They
round
blow
2
out game
against
1, and then they lose game 2, which goes into my bet a little bit later.
in Cleveland. I'm right there with you.
Mhm.
But I do think that Boston will get this done. They do get Kristaps Porzingis back, I believe, starting game 3. He's been dealing with that calf injury, something similar to what Giannis had as well. So that's only going to be a boost for them. But I just think right now for this Boston team that this has been one of the more deeper teams in the entire, or at least for a long time for this Boston Celtics team, right? They added Drew Holiday, who has, one of the better two-way players in the NBA. He has had championship experience. Derek White has been phenomenal for this team during the regular season. Obviously, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum as well. Al Horford turned back the clock in game 6
Yeah.
in that series clinching game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I think there's a lot of pieces there for the Boston Celtics. For the Indiana Pacers, we talked about they've been playing their brand of basketball, but I think
They got to be
that's only
tired.
they have to. I think that's going to show up in game one here for
Yes.
the Indiana Pacers. But they've been really good at home, so I think that I do think the Pacers will win a couple games in this series. But I think eventually, just because of the scoring options that this Boston Celtics team has, I think they will
Mhm.
advance to the NBA Finals and beat them. So if you want to get creative with it, I know they're like close to -1,000 are the Boston Celtics. So if you want to take Boston in 6 games, my favorite play
Right.
is the over 5.5 games. That was at plus odds. I
Yeah.
do think that
Yeah.
Indiana can get 2 games here, but I do think that the Boston Celtics will get this done here. I just think this team is too deep compared to what the Indiana Pacers have right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think your way to find value in this series is to bet the exact
Exactas, yeah.
outcome because here's the thing. I'm looking at Boston, the series spreads -1.5, -350, Boston
Yeah.
-2.5, -160. So like don't play any of those. But yeah, the exact I think makes the most sense. All right. Well, I mean, I kind of feel like we're probably on the same side here when we look at this. I'm gonna just lay the 9.5 with the Celtics based on
Yeah.
what we both just said. I mean, the Celtics are well rested. They've been off for days, right? And
Mhm.
even their last game, they cruised. It was like a 25-point blowout win in that game. They've outscored their opponents by 114 points during the playoffs this year, despite just playing 10 games through 2 rounds. That's insane. You look at
Yeah.
this Pacers team, and they just had a hard fought game 7 where the Knicks gave them everything that they could. And if you look at that score too, it wasn't like a huge blowout in this game. They had to fight really hard in this one. And like we just said, the C's have only lost 2 postseason games, and both of them have been game 2. In game 1 have been blowouts. So I'm looking for that to happen again. I'm going to lay the 9.5 with the Celtics, but you're looking at their team total.
Yeah, I agree with you about the 9.5. It's always a tough or a tough turnaround, especially with a game team coming off of a game 7, and then you have that quick turnaround. You only have 1 day off in between those games. You have to get ready for the Boston Celtics. And I think that's just a tough territory for them. So at least in game 1, I agree with you with the -9.5. I also like their team total to go over. Defensively, the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs are the second worst defensive rated team. They've given up the points. We saw it in round 1 and round 2 against the New York Knicks. And that now, like I mentioned, this Boston team is one of the best offensive teams that they're going to face up until this point in the Eastern Conference Finals. So I do think that they have a lot of success on the offensive side of the basketball as well. In 2 games during the regular season, I know a lot of people don't like comparing, playoff stats with regular season stats, but the Boston Celtics scored, I want to say, 129 points on
Yeah.
average in the 2 home games
Yeah.
during the regular
Yeah.
season. So I expect Jason Tatum to have a big game. Jaylen Brown, Derek White, I think they'll be firing on all cylinders. I do think this is a series where they want to attack the basket because they don't have that rim protection to the Indiana Pacers. But at least in game 1, I do think they can walk into 120 plus points here. I think this will be a blowout victory for the Boston Celtics in game 1.
Yeah, the only time that I would consider taking the Pacers is in game 2 based on what we've seen from the Celtics in game 2,
Yeah.
of the playoffs this year, and they haven't even if they're home, it doesn't seem to matter, but this could be one maybe where, the Celtics win in 5, yeah, or potentially in 6, because I just think that this Pacers team is gassed. All right, so moving on to the West, you got the Mavericks plus 135, the Timberwolves minus 160 here. Who would you say is the best player in this series? Because you got Ant-Man, who's getting some Michael Jordan comparisons recently, which is wild to me. You got Luca, who's had a hell of a season, MVP caliber season, but is playing a little bit hobbled, but still crazy. Then you got Kyrie and you got Kat. Who's the most exciting player? Who's the best player, do you think, in this series?
There's a deeper story to that Anthony Edwards and Michael Jordan comparison, and maybe something that
Oh,
we'll discuss offline. But
yes.
obviously, it's between Anthony Edwards and Luka Doncic, right? And
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards has been absolutely phenomenal throughout the playoffs. And one of the main reasons why Minnesota is here up until this point in the Western Conference Finals. I think for me, it's still Luka, just because of the different ways he can affect the game. We talked about how he can score points, but he can also rebound the basketball. He can also find his teammates and dish up the assist. He's one of the few players in the NBA that can walk into any arena and put up a triple double because that's how a dynamic player that Luka is. So I do think it's Luka that is the best player in this series. I mean, you could put it 1A, 1B between those two guys. I think the question then becomes, for both those teams outside of those two guys, like which of the depth pieces and which team of the role players are going to step up, right? But I think this is going to be, I think whichever guy has the better series between Karl Anthony Towns and Kyrie Irving is going to be the
Mm.
team that advances to the NBA Finals, because that's how important I think those two guys are. But I do like the depth a little bit better for the Dallas Mavericks. We saw that, like we talked about, against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But this series is going to be so much fun to watch between Anthony Edwards and Luka. So right now, to answer your question, I'd give Luka just a slight edge.
I would too. It's just the injury with him,
Yeah.
is what just makes him more of a question mark to me. So we look at these game one odds, which is on the 22nd. Timberwolves are laying 4. They're minus 115 on the money line. If you like the Mavericks catching the 4, that's at minus 105 or at plus 150, 152. This total 26.5. I don't have a good read on this game one. This is one where I kind of want to watch the first one and get into it. I do think that the Timberwolves win this series. I like them, their spread minus 1.5, just because Dallas to me is just built around their offense, at least, is built around Luka, right? And it's
Yeah.
really Luka operating in isolation on the offense. And what are the Timberwolves really good at? I mean, they've got so many incredible defenders. We saw what they were able to do to the Nuggets in that second half. And I believe that they allow, in the top 1 or 2 in points per possession and isolation allowed in the regular season. So if anyone can make things tough on Luka, it is these Timberwolves. I think they get out of this series. But do you have any bets on game one or of the series that you like for the West?
Yeah, I think game one, I'm right there with you. It's a tale of two things, because you have another team that's coming off of the game 7, have a quick turnaround, and those are always a difficult spot. But
An
also,
emotional game 7, beating the champs in Denver.
yeah, division
I could see a
rival
crash.
as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And but for the Dallas Mavericks as well, like, when it kind of went back and did some digging, I think since the 2020 season, Dallas Mavericks in game ones in particular have not been very good. They're 1-6 straight up and 1-6 against the spread, 6-1 towards the under in game ones. They always respond in game two. So I mean, it's which side do you want to be on here? I would look at Minnesota in game one. Um,
Okay.
Again, this team, like you mentioned, right? The matchup is going to come down to that perimeter defense of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Are they going to be able to slow down Luka and Kyrie in this series? I think that's going to be the difference.
If
Um,
we see that in game one, you're going to see these odds shift dramatically.
yes, I think that will be probably north of minus 250 if Minnesota does
Yeah.
win game one. I'm still leaning Dallas here, and I could be completely wrong here, but I just feel like
Texas Homer. No, I'm just kidding.
it's Dallas. No way. I'd be
I-
fired from SGPN if I was supporting Dallas. But I just feel like Luka and Kyrie will rise to the occasion here. I think this is going to be a little bit of
yeah.
a tougher matchup for the
Experience.
Minnesota Timberwolves. Right. Yeah. And especially
Mhm.
with Kyrie, right? We talked about a 14-0 and close out games. He has that playoff experience. He has that championship experience as well. And for Minnesota, I'm not saying the luck is going to run out. There's no luck involved for this team, because they just play that
That's
hard
good.
nosed defense. They play their brand of basketball. But I think
Mhm.
it really comes down to that. Do I believe that Karl Anthony Towns will be able to stay consistent throughout this series? And what do you get from their role players? Where for the Dallas Mavericks, like, their role players have done it throughout the NBA playoffs, like PJ Washington, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford coming off the bench for them. And again, I think this is an opportunity for Kyrie Irving to really step up in the Western Conference Finals here. So I'll go with the Dallas Mavericks here. I don't love it, but I just feel like that they just have the better supporting cast to get past this Minnesota Timberwolves team. And what better way would the NBA love than to have Luka Doncic in the NBA
Ah,
Finals? Again, throw out another conspiracy there for you.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Who's roughing these games in the West? Is it brothers? All right. So who do you think is going to win it all? Obviously, the Boston Celtics are the favorite here, especially with the Nuggets out of the contention. We did see that the shift happen in the odds here. Celtics pretty overwhelming. It's like, yeah, I think are the Celtics the most rested, most, healthy, well-rounded team left in the playoffs? Probably, but they have not proven
Yeah.
that they can get it done. They're unfortunately like my 49ers. They get there, and then they can't seem to get it done. So I'll take a little bit more value on the Timberwolves, but tell me why nobody's beating the Celtics.
Yeah, I'll be the chalk guy here. I think when
Mhm.
you look at the offseason moves that the Boston Celtics made, adding Drew Holiday, a perimeter defender, then giving you another option with Porzingis, um, along with already Derek White was there, obviously Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum. I mean, that's a very, very deep team. And any of those 5 guys can really go out and have a great offensive night for you as well, and take some of that pressure off of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And we saw that throughout the playoffs because those are the caliber players that the Boston Celtics have right now. I think the counter argument for the Boston side would be, do you trust Joe Mazzulla to lead this team to a championship? Because we've seen some chinks in the armors and some
I don't
questionable
know.
decisions,
Yeah.
from him down the stretch. And also, can Boston defend home court? Because when you get to the NBA Finals, those one game that you lose at home could be the difference between you winning a championship
They
or
don't like playing in
losing.
front of their fans. I've noticed in the postseason, they'd rather go win somewhere else.
They rather win on the road, whatever the case might be for them. But yeah, I just because of the available bodies right now as well for the Boston
Yeah.
Celtics and how deep this team is. I mean, guys coming off the bench, I've been mentioned. Peyton Pritchard has been great. Sam Hauser, those guys have been key as well for this Boston Celtics team. So I'll be boring and I'll be the chalk guy here. I'll go with the Boston Celtics to win the championship.
If they can't get it done this year after, making multiple finals, if there's going to be some questions about Jason Tatum. I mean, there's already questions about Jason Tatum in the postseason, but do you
Yeah.
agree that a lot of this kind of rests on his shoulder and his legacy? Is he going to be the guy who gets there and can't get it done in multiple years?
Yeah, I think that will be part of it, but I think we've seen not only in the NBA, but also in the NFL, a lot of the blame does go on the coaches, but I think rightfully so. If the Boston Celtics aren't able to get it done, I think it would be on head
If
coach
he
Joe
has
Mazzulla.
bad games, if he lays some eggs, which we have seen him do
Yeah,
in the finals, I think there will be some questions just about
Jason
him
Tatum
in
in general.
general.
Yeah.
Yep, and if he's able to play. All right, Munaf, thank you so much for joining us today here on Moxie Bets. He gave us a couple of his plays, but he has an entire breakdown of both of the conference finals with his podcast, the NBA podcast on Sports Gambling Podcast Network. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube or sgpn.com. You can also follow Munaf at SportsNerd824 on social media. Munaf, again, thank you for hanging with us today, giving us your picks. Anything else you would like to promote while we got you?
No, you
MLB
mentioned it. Just
podcast.
MLB is in full swing as well. This is the time where I start getting to MLB because now there's a lot less
Yeah.
games and I have like about a month of
Yeah.
data for the MLB. But yeah, MLB podcast, NBA podcast. Also have the Propcast if you're a player prop better as well. You can check me out there all over the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Also do the NBA pod over for pregame.com. So come check us out there. Had an incredible run for our player props. We went like close to 90% over the past 2 months. Yeah. So we've been killing it over there. So yeah, come check us out. Just talking NBA, MLB. It's just a lot of fun. But appreciate Katie for having me on, and I'm sure we'll talk again very soon.
Yes, absolutely. This has been Moxie Bets presented by Caesar Sportsbook. Join us next time. We'll talk to you soon.